Okay, welcome. This presentation is part of a series of presentations that I've been doing on reflections on passages in Savitri. And the title of this is The Debate of Savitri and Death. So the epic battle in Savitri is not fought with bows and arrows on an earthly battlefield, but in a colloquy between the god Death and the goddess Savitri, in the realms of consciousness between earthly life and nothingness. Their debate parallels the argument between the dominant scientific view of existence and the spiritual, evolutionary view championed by Sri Aurobindo. Of course, Savitri wins not only the debate, but secures a victory over death itself and brings back to life her dead husband. Thus, the debate concerns the superiority and antecedence of spirit versus matter. And depending on the truth of this crucial issue hangs our individual and collective life. In the poem, the dialogue takes place in the final part 3 of the poem and extends over 80 pages, leading to Savitri's climactic victory. The passage selected runs about 2.5 pages. It's thus an abbreviated selection from the argument, and yet it encapsulates the essential points of both sides. Death's contention is taken from the final part of Book 10, Canto 2, The Gospel of Death and the Vanity of the Ideal, on pages 619 and 20. And Savitri's argument comes in the beginning of the next canto, 3, The Debate of Love and Death, after about a half page of introductory comments on page 621. The selection taken for Savitri's reply is comparatively longer than that for Death, explaining in greater detail Sri Aurobindo's conception of this important philosophical issue, which is more complex and less well understood than the materialist standpoint expressed by Death. The presentation aims to draw out the implications of each of the arguments as well as their relative merits. So we begin with Death's argument. Nay, is not all thou art and doest a dream? Thy mind and life are tricks of matter's force. If thy mind seems to thee a radiant sun, if thy life runs a swift and glorious stream, this is the illusion of thy mortal heart, dazzled by a ray of happiness or light, impotent to live by their own right divine, convinced of their brilliant unreality, when their supporting ground is cut away, these children of matter into matter die. Even matter vanishes into earth, into energies vague, and energy is a motion of old naught. In these 12 short lines, Death lays out the materialist argument that mind and life are simply ephemeral movements of material force, that itself is an unsubstantial and vague motion in nothingness. It's a viewpoint that is supported by physics. In the view of quantum mechanics, since the early years of the 20th century, even the particles of matter are not really particles, solid particles. And a few quotes from an excellent primer on recent discoveries in physics describes these views. It's from a book titled 7 Brief Lessons on Physics by Carlo Rovelli. So there he quotes, or I quote, Heisenberg imagined that electrons do not always exist. They only exist when someone or something watches them. Or better, when they are interacting with something else. They materialize in a place with a calculable probability when colliding with something else. The quantum leaps from one orbit to another are the only means they have of being real. An electron is a set of jumps from one interaction to another. When nothing disturbs it, it is not in any precise place. It is not in a place at all. It's as if God had not designed reality with a line that was heavily scored, but just dotted it with a faint outline. In quantum mechanics, no object has a definite position, except when colliding headlong with something else. In order to describe it in mid-flight, between one interaction and another, we use an abstract mathematical formula which has not existence in real space, only in abstract mathematical space. But there is worse to come. These interactive leaps with which each object passes from one place to another do not occur in a predictable way, but largely at random. It is not possible to predict where an electron will reappear, but only to calculate the probability that it will prop up here or there. The question of probability goes to the heart of physics, where everything had seemed to be regulated by firm laws which were universal and irrevocable. And then another short quote fills out this first image of quantum mechanics. Electrons, quarks, photons, and gluons are the components of everything that sway around us in the space. They are the elementary particles studied in particle physics. To these particles, a few others are added, such as the neutrinos, which swarm throughout the universe but have little interaction with us, and the Higgs bosons, recently detected in Geneva in CERN's Large Hadron Collider. There are not many of these, fewer than 10 types, in fact. A handful of elementary ingredients that act like bricks in a gigantic Lego set, and with which the entire material reality surrounding us is constructed. The nature of these particles and the way they move is described by quantum mechanics. These particles do not have a pebble-like reality, but are rather the quanta of corresponding fields. They disappear and reappear according to the strange laws of quantum mechanics, where everything that exists is never stable and is nothing but a jump from one interaction to another. And then he gives a brief summary to round out the description. A handful of types of elementary particles which vibrate and fluctuate constantly between existence and non-existence, and swarm in space, even when it seems that there is nothing there, combine together to infinity, like the letters of a cosmic alphabet, to tell the immense history of galaxies, of the innumerable stars, of sunlight, of mountains, woods, and fields of grain, of the smiling faces of the young at parties, and of the night sky studded with stars. So death's pronouncements reflect something of the recent discoveries of quantum mechanics, but they interpret this view of existence in a particularly bleak and condescending way, essentially undercutting the value and meaning of existence. It should perhaps be interjected that the view of quantum mechanics as described is a provisional theory. It has stood up to scientific scrutiny, but it does not yet appear to be final. It is in contradiction to the theory of general relativity, which also has an equal standing and validity. And according to Auroville, it is an unelegant theory made up of various pieces and equations assembled without any clear order. Paul Dirac, a leading architect of quantum mechanics, concluded in the last years of his life that we have not yet solved the problem. But even accepting the present conclusions of the theory, death's conclusion that it wipes away the value and meaning of existence is not an inevitable or logical conclusion of the theory itself. We're all aware of the adage about whether a half glass of water is half full or half empty. We can apply the same analogy to the implications of particle physics. Is it the particle's apparent non-existence or apparent existence that we should emphasize? Does their apparent non-existence negate their apparent existence? Or does their apparent existence negate their apparent non-existence? And if their apparent existence and non-existence are somehow coexisting, then it would seem that their non-existence would give even greater value and meaning to their existence. There is another problem with death's conclusion, and that concerns the mixing up of different levels or layers of reality. For example, although we know that we can physically stimulate particular areas of our brain to produce thoughts, we cannot conclude that it is useless or meaningless to first think about our decisions or actions before carrying them out. Although light seems to be composed of photons that move in and out of existence, like other subatomic particles, we still should look both ways before we step out into traffic on a busy street. Or perhaps more relevant to death's argument, in a recent movie I saw, an assassin was depicted who felt no remorse or even any feeling for killing those he was paid to kill, because after all, they were just one individual among billions, living for a brief moment in the eternity of time. We live in a certain practical reality which is not negated by other levels of reality at the subatomic or macrocosmic ranges. Our practical reality is not unrelated to those others, but neither is it negated by them or rendered meaningless. Well, let's hear more of death's argument. How shall the ideal's unsubstantial hues be painted stiff on earth's vermilion blur? A dream within a dream come doubly true? How shall the will-o'-wisp become a star? The ideal is a malady of thy mind, a bright delirium of thy speech and thought, a strange wine of beauty, lifting thee to false sight, a noble fiction of thy yearnings made. Thy human imperfection it must share, Its forms in nature disappoint the heart, and never shall it find its heavenly shape, and never can it be fulfilled in time. Here, death addresses the unsubstantiality, the illusoriness of the ideal, a term which we can perhaps apply to all ideals of a greater or better life, but in the spiritual sense applies especially to a divinized and perfected life. Based on death's earlier arguments about the unsubstantiality of matter and the ending of every human life in death and disintegration, on what foundation can the ideal of a divine life be established? Like the thoughts that produce such ideals, they are but fleeting stirrings of the material brain, chemical reactions, and at best the vital yearnings and dreams of a short life that foresees its quickly approaching end. Our human brain has somehow, through eons of random processes of mutation and natural selection, evolved into a complex organ that can fabricate images and models of itself and the world in order to help it survive and reproduce. It is this material brain that fabricates images and models of an ideal existence for itself, to blunt the pain of its difficult and limited life. Like its own physical existence, its fleeting thoughts and hopes and dreams will dissolve into dust. They are but fantasies within the unreal dream of a solid and lasting material existence. He continues, O soul, misled by the splendor of thy thoughts, O earthly creature with thy dream of heaven, obey, resigned and still, the earthly law. Accept the brief light that falls upon thy days. Take what thou canst of life's permitted joy. Submitting to the ordeal of fate's scourge, suffer what thou must of toil and grief and care. There shall approach, silencing thy passionate heart, my long, calm night of everlasting sleep. There into the hush from which thou camest, retire. There is a certain reasonableness in death's advice, but also a certain perniciousness or malice. He suggests that Savitri is being misled by the splendor of her thoughts of an ideal life on earth, thoughts which he suggests are merely the stirrings or impulses in her physical brain. It is malicious because it is an advice which is meant to kill all hope for a higher divine life. But it is reasonable because it advises us to accept life as it is, with its joys and toils and griefs and cares. It is like saying, don't bang your head against the wall. You won't break the wall, only your head. Live your life. Enjoy it while you can. Take what joys life permits. Suffer its pains with dignity. At the end, your suffering will cease in everlasting sleep, in the calm and silence from which all has come. Then Savitri responds to death's arguments. She says, "O death, thou speakest truth, but truth that slays. I answer to thee with the truth that saves. A traveler new discovering himself, one made of matter's world his starting point. He made of nothingness his living room, and night a process of the eternal light, and death a spur towards immortality. God wrapped his head from sight in matter's cowl. His consciousness dived into inconscient depths. All knowledge seemed a huge dark nescience. Infinity wore a boundless zero's form. His abysms of bliss became insensible deeps. Eternity, a blank spiritual vast. Annulling an original nullity, the timeless took its ground in emptiness and drew the figure of a universe, that the spirit might adventure into time and wrestle with adamant necessity, and the soul pursue a cosmic pilgrimage. Savitri does not deny all that death asserts. She says that what he says has truth, but it is a truth which slays, which kills, and she will answer with a truth that saves. She argues that the world of matter does not, that it does start from a kind of nothingness, but this nothingness was made by God as a starting point for a world in which he could live as in his house, his own living room. So it is more like a seeming nothingness, for it holds within itself something, at least a potentiality that can develop into something. Night or ignorance is a process of the eternal light, the eternal knowledge or wisdom of God, which has veiled itself in darkness and is gradually unveiling itself. This process is described in several ways using different terms. It is described as consciousness diving into inconscient depths, as all knowledge seeming to become a dark nescience or absence of knowledge, as infinity taking the form of a boundless zero, as abysms of bliss becoming insensible deeps, and as eternity becoming a blank spiritual vast. And then the reason for this veiling of the divine is stated, that the eternal, infinite, and free spirit might adventure into time and wrestle with adamant necessity, and the soul pursue a cosmic pilgrimage through time to reach the unveiled divine. This reason is vividly encapsulated and has become popularized by a book title, which comes from another line in Savitri, The Adventure of Consciousness. Death, the end of individual living beings, is itself a spur, a stimulus for those same beings to strive to survive and prosper, and even to become immortal. I think most of us sometimes consider our own mortality, that our time on this earth is limited. And I suppose people may respond to this in different ways. Some may say, let me enjoy it as much as I can. Whereas others may say, let me make the best use of my life as I can. Or let me become the best that I can be. In each of these ways, death is a spur, a stimulus that drives us to live more fully. But on the collective level of humanity as a whole, we see that our mortality drives us also to improve and prolong our lives as much as possible. We see this most clearly in the efforts of medical science to cure disease, to alleviate pain, suffering, and disability, and to discover the processes of life and death. Recent genetic research in medicine is making progress in its study of the possibility of reversing aging and prolonging life indefinitely. Savitri continues. A spirit moved in black immensities and built a thought in ancient nothingness. A soul was lit in God's tremendous void, a secret laboring glow of nascent fire. In Nihil's gulf, his mighty puissance wrought. She swung her formless motion into shapes, made matter the body of the bodiless. Infant and dim, the eternal mights awoke. In inert matter breathed the slumbering life. In a subconscient life, mind lay asleep. In waking life, it stretched its giant limbs to shake from it the torpor of its drowse. A senseless substance quivered into sense. The world's heart commenced to beat, its eyes to see. In the crowded, dumb vibrations of a brain, thought fumbled in a ring to find itself, discovered speech, and fed the newborn word that bridged with spans of light the world's ignorance. In waking mind, the thinker built his house. In a few sentences, Savitri describes the steps of evolution from nothingness to thinking humanity. In the first line, she asserts that the presence of a living, moving spirit in an original infinity of black darkness, which grows into a glowing flame of soul, embodies itself in matter. In inert matter, it grows into a subconscient life. And in this slumbering life, it wakes into sensibility and conscious sentient life. The brain grows and thought arises. Thought seeks to know itself and discovers speech, which helps it organize its developing understanding. And as this understanding progresses, mind begins to consciously think about itself and its environment and to build these into a coherent and meaningful world. This explanation accepts as true much of death's argument, with the very important difference of this presence of a living, moving spirit in the original nothingness. It accepts the long eonic evolution out of this spiritual nothingness into a thinking human being. This spirit in the void that built thought is a crucial addition, however, and helps to complete and render reasonable and plausible the scientific view that an original nothingness somehow, without consciousness, without any means at its disposal except perhaps random chance, blossomed into an organized universe and world, complete with Einsteins and Mozarts and saints and sages. The presence of an original conscious spirit, absolute, infinite, timeless, blissful, all-powerful, beautiful, and divine, hidden as a seed of potentiality in this nothingness, gradually blossoming in time and space and material form, renders the implausibility of the scientific view not only plausible, but reasonable and meaningful and wonderfully hopeful and promising. We have then these two competing explanations. One that's all starts from nothingness, and the other that all starts from an absolute divine existence, consciousness and bliss, which, as it were, scatters a seed of itself, a seed which appears as inconscient material energy on its surface, but which holds within itself, in potentiality, the release and efflorescence of its potentialities in material energy and form. From a logical standpoint, a divine absolute conscious existence should be able to hold back its full potentiality from its surface appearance, just as we ourselves are not obliged to constantly manifest all of our own potentialities through our physical form. It should be able to hold back, but also to release or express in a gradual, systematic way over time. On the other hand, is it logical that an original nothingness can become anything, much less become a lawful, organized, conscious, developing, creative being, or a world full of them in dynamic interaction with each other? Even if we avoid the extreme position that all started from nothing and say instead that it started from inconscient material energy and matter, the implausibility is hardly lessened. For this inconscient energy and matter has become organized, complexified, aggregated, developed, not only into more complex forms of matter, but into living beings, into conscious beings, into absolutely beautiful, harmonious, intelligent beings. And since there is no consciousness in matter guiding this material process of intricate organization and complexification, it again has to come about simply by chance. Savitri continues. A reasoning animal willed and planned and sought. He stood erect among his brute compeers. He built life new, measured the universe, opposed his fate, and wrestled with unseen powers, conquered and used the laws that rule the world, and hoped to ride the heavens and reach the stars, a master of his huge environment. Now through mind's windows stares the demigod, hidden behind the curtains of man's soul. He has seen the unknown, looked on truth's veilless face. A ray has touched him from the eternal sun. Motionless, voiceless, in foreseeing depths, he stands awake in supernature's light and sees a glory of arisen wings and sees the vast descending might of God. In this part of the passage, Savitri continues and completes her recounting of the evolution of consciousness on Earth with its present stage of the development of humankind. The human being developed out of the ape, stood erect and walked on 2 legs instead of 4, his head held high, surveying all around and looking up to the heavens. His mind developed reason out of the sense and life-bound animal mind and began to reason and will and plan and seek. He reflected on himself and the universe, examined their laws and powers, and utilized them to master nature and recreate his world and life. And now, having evolved his mind to a relative perfection, mankind seeks for his deeper soul, looks towards a greater divine perfection, sees the one divine being in himself and all around. Of course, human history bears witness to this searching and finding of the divine from the times of the Vedas and Upanishads and Bible to modern-day Christian and Hindu saints. While this awakening to the Spirit is still confined to an elite of humanity, it is a widening circle, and spiritual ideals are gradually entering into the mainstream of thought among the cultured peoples of the planet. And represented most notably by the divine poet himself, and recorded so extensively in his writings, on the summits of this evolutionary ascent, a human being stands awake in supernature's light, in a supreme divine consciousness, and ascending ever higher into the infinite, sees the vast descending might of God, recreating the life of our world in the rhythm of a higher divine beauty and harmony. Savitri continues, O death, thou lookest on an unfinished world, assailed by thee and of its road unsure, peopled by imperfect minds and ignorant lives, and sayest God is not, and all is vain. How shall the child already be the man? Because he is infant, shall he never grow? Because he is ignorant, shall he never learn? In a small, fragile seed, a great tree lurks. In a tiny gene, a thinking being is shut. A little element in a little sperm, it grows and is a conqueror and a sage. Then wilt thou spew out death, God's mystic truth? Deny the occult spiritual miracle? Still wilt thou say there is no spirit, no God? Perhaps more convincing than reason, the apparent fact of mankind's extremely limited and frail existence is like ice-cold water thrown on the ideal of a divine life on earth. I think it is this that most cuts at our aspirations and efforts for spiritual truth and realization. We acutely see and sense in every way our weaknesses, our defects, both in body and mind. We all have suffered physically, and we know that death will one day strike us down. We know the limitations of our character, our proneness to anger, lust, and greed, our failures in love, generous self-giving and compassion, our lack of knowledge, understanding, and spiritual wisdom. And yet, logically, this is a spurious argument for the vanity of the spiritual ideal. For what does not exist today is no argument for what will exist in the future. We can see that all is constantly changing and that there has been a tremendous progress in human development in the past couple of millennia, and especially in the past couple of centuries. We constantly witness in all of nature around us that out of small things grow great things. So the fact of our littleness does not negate the possibility of our future divine greatness. Of course, we may question whether what happens in the coming centuries has any value for us personally, since we will be dead and gone. But the whole spiritual argument, at least in the Indian tradition and particularly in Savitri's standpoint, is based on the premise that our material bodies are not all that we are, that we have an immortal soul that outlives our bodies, that our soul will take other bodies in the future and reap the rewards of human progress. Moreover, this argument is not limited to the possibilities of our future lives. It pertains to the power of the Spirit and our soul inhabiting our present physical frames. Those divine possibilities exist within our souls now. And wading through lifetimes is not our only play. We can also persuade our external being to turn towards our soul and open up to its greater possibilities. The divine being is here and now, and it is calling to us to turn towards it and away from the pettiness of our surface limited life and its incessant pulls and prods. It has all the wisdom and power and delight that we seek so futilely in our outward driven lives. It is inviting us to participate in its progressive manifestation, even now. Savitri concludes, a mute material nature wakes and sees. She has invented speech, unveil the will. Something there waits beyond, towards which she strives. Something surrounds her into which she grows. To uncover the spirit, to change back into God, to exceed herself, is her transcendent task. In God concealed, the world began to be. Tardily, it travels towards manifest God. Our imperfection towards perfection toils. The body is the chrysalis of a soul. The infinite holds the finite in its arms. Time travels towards revealed eternity. The paradox of existence is that inconscient material nature, the fiery suns and the desolate rocky planets, have given birth to conscious beings who speak and toil towards perfection. The solution to this paradox is that this material world conceals God and that it is slowly manifesting God. Sri Aurobindo has unraveled the mystery of existence. It now makes sense. The solution is simple and straightforward, as elegant as E equals mc squared, while it also gives to existence as a whole, and our personal life in particular, a profound significance, a profound direction and aim. The materialistic explanation, death's argument, on the contrary, leaves an inexplicable contradiction that nothingness can give birth to a living, vibrant, conscious life that is growing, becoming more and more conscious and complexly organized, developed, refined, happy, and fulfilled. How? It just happened. That's all. Pure chance. That is not an explanation, but a play of words covering over a contradiction. What then is the significance and meaning of life that Savitri's argument bestows? It is first, that we are not alone in an indifferent, unconscious universe. God, the supreme being who has created all this within his own being, surrounds us, holds us in his arms. He is always there and always ready to comfort and help in our difficult task. And secondly, that task is to exceed ourselves, the limited creature which we are now, to uncover the spirit within us and change back into God. This, of course, is only possible because it is the truth of what we always were. God is in all. All is in God. And God is all. This is the spiritual equivalent of E equal mc squared. The only problem is that this truth is covered over, hidden from us, due to our ignorance and our false identification with our ego, our sense of being a limited person, separate from God. The removal of this ignorance and this false identification is our task. And how are we to accomplish this task? For this, there is a simple answer and a complex answer. The complex answer is described in the Synthesis of Yoga and the 4 volumes of Letters on Yoga. It's a long, multifaceted endeavor which can be done in many different ways depending on our nature and our prior development. The simple answer is to sincerely and wholly surrender ourselves into the arms of the supreme and all-loving God who surrounds us and is in us and is waiting for us to consciously give ourselves to Him. He will take us into His arms and remove all our self-imposed limitations. But surrendering to Him means we must allow Him to do this in His own way and His own time. Thank you.